Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to announce that Integrated EDR is now available in SolarWinds RMM. My name is Ashley Bono. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for RMM. In today's webinar, we're going to get a look at the product with our Director of Product Management and EDR Mastermind, Nick Hansen. But before we do that, our MSP Sales Director and International Man of Mystery, David Weeks, is going to talk about the current climate for cybersecurity, why layered security is the best defense for protecting end customers and yourselves, and how RMM with integrated EDR is not only pivotal to your cybersecurity posture, but could also be a smart business move as well. We'll be taking questions at the end, so be sure to type those into the question section so we can answer them when the time comes. And David, it seems like most everyone would agree that it's important to have a strong cybersecurity posture, but I've actually heard a lot of folks say they or their customers don't think their data is valuable or valuable enough to want to steal, or that they could be targets for a cyber attack. How do you typically respond to that?
Yeah, you know what, and thanks for having me on this, Ashley. It's interesting that we hear that a lot, that it'll never be us, and I think people need to start to change their mindset and really start to think along the level of not if it will happen, but when it will happen. All data to some point has a level of value, and whether or not it's a sophisticated attack that comes in that hits a customer of yours or not, it's really all about you putting up those layers of defense, as you said. And when we look at the changing climate out in the marketplace with work from home, a lot of things have really shifted. And I think service providers need to look at it in a different way. I think a big part of it as we all hear about this work from home, and we've heard about it a million times, is it's really coming down to the fact that we have more and more people on personal machines. We don't know what's on them. We don't know who's using those in the household, maybe even if it is a corporate-owned machine. And when you see that, 66% of organizations have experienced a cyber attack, I don't think really we can use the excuse anymore to say it's not going to be us. And we've got to put those layers of protection in place. When organizations are looking at their security today, more and more of them, I think, ultimately are saying we need to do more. Business owners and decision makers at your customers as service providers are becoming more educated. And they understand and they read in the news the cost of these attacks. As you can see here, in 2019, the average of 1.24 million. And a lot of people will say to me, that's crazy, a 25, 30, 40 user shop will never get to that level. But when you think down below all the catastrophic effects of sensitive data, impaired reputation, loss of customers, legal fees, or the loss of your business, and that can happen. There's a level of trust, and people want to buy from organizations that they trust. And we know today that organizations, if they don't have a good security posture, people are actually a lot more leery about doing business with them. And so think about yourself in your own position when you're doing online ordering and so forth. We trust all the big names, but when we're doing smaller stuff, what's the first thing that we look for? Secure payment methods and so forth, because we're educated. But a lot of the end users aren't, and it's our job as an industry, I think, to start to educate more, giving all of you the ability to go out and look at building out some of those programs and those offerings. And when you think about the way that you need to manage your end users, you need to manage them by exception, I think is really a key component of it. And not thinking that, hey, the majority of my users are pretty smart. That's great. We know that the majority are. It's the one or two who maybe don't always think and click on the wrong things that cause the larger issue for the wider organization. And really think about why is change necessary. Well, when we used to look at the way that we manage security, and it's still out there in the marketplace today, a lot of us, what we did was, we thought about how is an attack going to occur. And we had antivirus, we had patch management, and we had some data backup in place and maybe a firewall. That covered really three areas of the layers of the network. But what happens today? A malicious email comes in. Somebody happens to click on that, as I mentioned, by managing by exception. That user clicks, it calls PowerShell, right? It hits a payload server and it installs malware onto the device. Maybe nothing's actually occurred yet, but the potential is there. But if that does run, it persists, it downloads a trick bot, that trick bot runs, it ultimately does a lateral spread throughout the network, it downloads the ransomware, and it encrypts the device. So if all I had before was my AV, my patch, my firewall, I now have to rely on my backup and hope that everything in my backup is in place, which it probably is, but we all know that there can be corruption of data, maybe something failed, maybe they're managing their own backups, which means I left myself a single point of failure. Think about all of the other areas of the network that we need to cover. We need to start to think about those areas of perimeter level protection, malicious URL filtering, managing passwords, MFA, 2FA, adding in user training, pen testing, etc. I'm not saying that you need to do all of this on day one. What I'm saying, though, is make it more difficult for the bad guy to get into the environment. You've got to work backwards, and you've got to think about working backwards from the data. The more valuable the data that sits in the environment, the more walls that you need to put up. And the more walls you put up, the more that you frustrate that bad guy. And that bad guy will then start to give up a lot quicker. And so that's really what it's all about, is the investment that you make working in reverse from the data outwards. And when you do that, you'll start to identify the gaps and the potential risks that sit in your customers' environments. Now, looking at this as well too, ask this of your own practice today, being a service provider. Are you the gold standard to your customers? Because if you're not, you could be the relation that causes a breach to happen. And obviously that is something that nobody wants to have occur, because your arms reach out to a multitude of different customers. So when we look at the integration with RMM, why is this so important? There's really a couple key areas. It gives you the ability to manage, obviously, on an integrated level. That gives you elasticity and scalability. But what's the big change? The big change is not that AV is bad. It's that the threat factors in the marketplace have changed. And as a result, new tech is required. And when we look at that new tech, it comes in an endpoint detection and response. Sentinel One is the market leader on this. They're the market leader for a reason, because of the way that they can see the network, the way that their AI engines manage across the devices in the network to give you those enhanced layers of protection. And if something does happen to occur, because again, it's not if, it's when, the idea is that you have that ability to be able to roll back quickly. So this is designed to defend. It's allowing you to be proactive in your security posture and not reactive. And those are a lot of the differentials that we see out in the marketplace when we look at things like standardized antivirus versus an EDR type solution that more and more service providers are moving to. Many of you today have probably looked at the Sentinel One solution. You were probably waiting for that integration. It makes sense. And whether or not you are going to take on the integration day one or not, get onto the product, because you need to start putting those layers of defense in place, and again, working backwards from the data set. So thinking about your practice today, and as you look at integrated EDR, really where are some of the key benefits? And there's several that sit there. One is that it's going to pay for itself with time savings. If you have been in a situation as a service provider where somebody got ransomware in the environment, or 4 or 5 users, and all you had were the backups to rely on, how long did that take to get that person back online? It might have taken an hour or 2 hours to do a full restore and make sure everything's correct on their machine. That's fine, and it's awesome. We got the person back working. However, you need to look at it from a human resource and human capital cost. That was 2 hours of time that employee was not generating revenue for the company. Where if we had a rollback feature that only took a couple minutes to get them back online, now their productivity is back to the level of expectation that we want to have it at and that the company wants to have it at. So you get that out-of-box functionality today. And we'll show you some of that as well, so you can see all of the enhanced features that you receive in something like this where it's new tech. And again, I'm going to keep stressing that this is new technology. This is not just a better AV. It is new tech. Then you look at the capabilities that require less management time. So it actually protects a wider spectrum of threats. It doesn't rely on, core signature updates where an attack has to happen in the world and a signature needs to be developed. This can run an AI engine where it's constantly looking at what's happening in the environment and saying, that doesn't quite look right. I'm going to put a stop to that right now. Then you as the service provider have the ability to say, hey, was that legitimate? Or is that something I just need to make an exception for in the future? But it will take less management time, believe it or not, than an antivirus because it has a lot of inherent capabilities that it runs on its own. So when you reverse the effects of attack and you get the customer up and running faster, as you can see here, roughly 2/3 of the world's SMBs are now experiencing cyber attacks. So again, I'm going back to it's not if, it's when. 45% still feel, though, that their posture is ineffective. That is a greenfield for all of you as a service provider to come in and educate the market. We know that the majority of them, as you can see, 39% don't have an incident response plan. If you were to ask the majority of your users, what would happen if you suddenly got ransomware or a virus? What would be the first thing that they would probably say to you? Most likely they would say, I would call you as my IT person versus disconnecting from the network. Again, that's the lack of an incident response plan. You need to find those gaps and you need to figure out how to fill them. And you fill them with educational content to the decision makers in the company on what is the acceptable level of risk that they're willing to carry. Because the more risk they're willing to carry, the less investment that they're going to have to make in their security posture. However, the more you're going to abstain from the risk as a service provider because you've made the recommendations that you believe that they should have. So if you can ultimately reduce the operating costs and increase your recurring revenue, it's a win-win for you. But as well, it's a win-win for the end user because we're mitigating their risk as a business at a much greater level than what we may be doing today. So overall, everybody benefits from this for a smaller investment up front versus carrying the risk and potentially having that hit later with a much larger cost to remediate that. So when we look at the integrated EDR, again, it's efficiently configured, easily configured, and you can manage your security from that single console, that SPOG, that single pane of glass. You're going to enhance your layered offerings, and it's going to allow you to put those walls up to frustrate the bad guys and to give yourself the ability to sleep better at night and your customers as well too. This is something you should charge more for. Okay, you should go out. You may have it in your margins today in your contracts to go ahead and roll this out everywhere because to you, your less management time will pay for itself, which means your productivity increases and your overall margins. That's awesome. But in the future, as you continue to look at contract negotiation, don't be scared to put an enhanced fee on this because of the enhanced capability of the tech that you're putting in place. Because again, mitigating risk costs money. And that's okay because business owners are willing to make that investment overall. I think what's probably best now is if we can now hand it over to Nick, and Nick's actually going to take you through a demo. So I'm going to give him control because I think probably a lot of you, what it is that you want to see is this in action. And I think whenever you see the capability that it's going to give you, I think it's going to allow you to see that it's worth the investment and you going out to your customers to be able to manage at that level. So Nick, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks a lot, David. I appreciate that. Appreciate that setup and great points there. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the time here. So what I'm going to take you through, like David said, is a view of how we've integrated EDR with Sentinel One into the RMM product here, right? So one of the great things we've done, we've actually built something that we're calling our ecosystem framework for integration management here, right? And EDR, endpoint detection response, is just our first one of many. You can see you should have seen a new puzzle piece over here for integrations management on your dashboards within the last month or so. And that's our starting point for our integrations as we move forward, right? So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and cheating a little bit. This one has been activated before, but you'll see a button here for activating your trial, right? So you're, without doing anything else in product, you can now activate a 30-day trial of EDR on your environment, so that you can get comfortable with it, play with it a little bit, figure out some of its ins and outs, and how you can use it in your environment. It is a very powerful tool, and when you get it installed, we think you'll see a lot of the value that it brings, right? So after you hit the activate, it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to activate. There's some back office system that happens, but then you come back to this page, and when you reload your dashboard for the first time, you'll actually see a couple new items here that indicate that indicate that EDR has been enabled. The first one here, you can actually see that we've actually added these new menus and the ability to drill into the different settings, which I'll get into. But also from your dashboard view, you see a couple things here. Let me go ahead and reload this. And you'll see that we've added a couple north pane views, a couple things into the south pane that you can actually see and learn from what's going on in your environment. The first one here in the north pane, we have a new column for endpoint detection and response that you can add, view or not view as you see fit. But in this case, these two devices have had it enabled, right? So this indicates that it's now active on that device. This first device, you can also see that in our summary view, we have a view that the feature is now enabled. And we also have two checks that are implemented that show, from a monitoring perspective, if Sentinel One agent is running on the device. The first one is just a standard Windows check to make sure the Sentinel agent is running. And you can obviously integrate these with your notification and alerting preferences, however you have that, if you have it hooked up with any PSAs or MSP manager, those kind of things. And the second one is the script check for endpoint detection and response, right? So the first one I'll show is, we'll come back to this guy, and we'll show when it goes into a pass state, when this script check passes, it actually tells you a decent amount of information about the running service on the device. One, it'll tell you the agent version, whether it's running normally, and if self-protection is enabled. The most important one is this infected status. Is it clean or is it infected, right? And that's the determination that the Sentinel One agents made on the device to determine if there are any known threats that are not managed, that are not mitigated on the device. And I'll go into a couple points about what that is. But in that case, the device was clean, so that the check returned passed. But in this case, it actually returned failed. And so you can actually see it here, that when it returns infected, it will actually fail the check, and you'll be able to alert on that. So that's a device that needs attention right now. What is the actual issue? And there's a nice integration with active issues. It sort of falls out directly that anything that goes into any of these check states will pop out and pop into here immediately for management there, right? So digging into what do I do if I got an alert on a device, right? So the first thing, and you'll see this was David had mentioned this is the dashboard, right? So here's that view of devices in my network, right? So in this case, I'm going to drill through, and these devices are offline, so the healthy status here has been changed. But this is really just a view of the filters that Sentinel One has into the environment and what it can actually see and manage, right? So you can actually see there's actually a whole bunch of filters that you can do, look around for different things in the environment based upon type, domain, if you manage different domains for partners all over the place, and you can actually do a free form search for those devices as well. Now, a couple things I want to point out here in the interface that we've seen that so you can actually get to a device level view where you actually see the devices or the information on a specific device over time. And then there's in two places on the dashboard pane, there's this actions view. And right now, because of the way the integration has been architected, these options are grayed out here. So it looks like you don't have the ability to do a lot of the functionality here, and it'll actually pop up a message that says the current role does not have permissions. That's there and here. and I'm just previewing this because they're actually, it's not that you don't have the ability to do those actions, you just have to go to a different place to do them, right? So you can notice the group setting here of where those devices live. And if you go to the policies view, you'll see that those would match up to the settings here, right? So we actually come back here and I'll be able to find that device. Now this view is directly into the Sentinel One console, right? So we're actually pulling the console view of that from our consoles into this environment. And that's what that single pane of glass that David was referring to here, that you can actually find the actions here. And hopefully you won't need to run many of these actions too often, but that's where they're available for you as you come through the interface here, right? So at the policy level, we'll go back to the policy screen here, and this is where you can really get the power and see the power of what Sentinel One integration offers. Here you have a detect and protect modes, right? So as you're learning, as you start this out, I would highly suggest you use detect only mode for your policies so that you can see in the environment, because once you turn on protect, actually it starts actioning as soon as it sees threats, right? So the first time you go through it, I would suggest setting up some policies here that set for malicious threats and suspicious threats. So as David mentioned, this is not a static target that we're working with here, right? The threat actors out there are pernicious and they are nasty, right? And the harder you make it, they just sort of go away and find easier targets, right? So in this case, there's a list of known malicious threats that Sentinel One's agent will detect, but it also has these engines these AI-based engines that it can actually watch as things are happening on the device to see that it's not just based on a signature of a file that got downloaded and is now being active. It actually can do, it'll actually see when things are moving around in the network, and I'll sort of get into that. But then it also has the idea of a suspicious threat, what says, well, we're not exactly sure 100%, but we think it might be, and you can actually do something different based on that. So, but if it's a malicious threat, you can actually see the protection level, other things that you can do. The default is to kill and quarantine, so it actually stops anything that the process, if it happens to be a process, is doing. And if it'll actually quarantine the file, which would move it into an encrypted area of the agent and for later analysis. You can also remediate anything that it did in the environment, that you can actually, if it made changes to the device or settings on a device, it could actually roll those back, or it could actually remediate those and change them back. And then the rollback is actually to, if you've got that turned on, it integrates with the migrate, and this is on Windows only, it integrates with the volume shadow copy service, which is actually on device, implemented snapshotting through the operating system that will actually take snapshots of the device and be able to roll back. And this is the saving grace for ransomware when it does get through, right? So there's a lot of defenses here. And if it does happen to get through all those, you can also protect it with the rollback feature to say, to get back to a known good state for files that were actually had encryption applied to them, and to recover those, right? So there's a couple more settings here as we scroll down through where you can actually, as David mentioned, you can actually disconnect it from the network. Once you get to the point where you say something bad is happening on this, actually turn off the network interface and only allow the Sentinel One agent to communicate with the management backend, so that you can clean the device, go through the remediation or rollback procedures as needed, so it doesn't spread across the internal LAN that the device is connected to. A couple other things that you can do from a tuning perspective, and then need to make sure that you actually hit the save button here at the inside of this iframe, so that the actual changes get saved to your policy, and then you can finish out and go back to the application, to the integrated application, right? So that being said, there's also some stuff I want to show you around analyzing threats as they come through. Let that finish there. So the other big part is analyzing threats as they're found in the environment, and what to do when actual threats are seen, right? So a couple things I wanted to show you. Again, there's a number of filtering options here that can actually be, you can look for certain content hatches if you have threat intelligence systems that you're working with, that you want to look for something in your environment. You can see if it's been flagged before. You can also just pick and choose things that have happened on devices or incident statuses that, just show me the ones that are unresolved or in progress, that kind of thing. So a couple things I want to show you for the interface that Sentinel One has created. We also see that you can actually see really dig into the threat that was detected. This one happens to be a ransomware that's actually encrypting files, right? So it has a lot of detail. This is actually released in their latest version here, where you can actually see a lot of details about the device, about the threat that was actually found and what happened to it, right? You can see that which detection type it was, which engine actually created it, right, or caught it. Some information if you want to actually find this out or do some more research with a virus total. You can also see that as well, and then and dig into it a little bit more. And then some information about the endpoint that it was actually found on. So the real interesting one is here. If you go into the Explorer view, this is one of the new eye candy charts that Sentinel One just came out with. But it'll actually follow the execution through the environment, right, on the device, and say what it was actually trying to do, right? So you can actually go and actually see the process level and information about when it started, what happened to it, what its actual command line, so you can actually see that kind of information. And then you can also go down here and actually view, this is for that specific process, but if we go all the way back up, you can actually see the network actions that this one threat did, and what it connected out to the destination IP. It's not really great when a Word document is reaching out to a lot of IP addresses for unknown reasons, right? So, and then you can actually see, you can actually drill into what was actually happening. And if you wanted to be able to export those values to a CSV file to actually see what, if you wanted to do your own sort of threat management or threat investigations to see what was actually there, and you can actually look at it that way, right? So, and then they also have some new concepts around the ability to take an analyst verdict, where actually your team can actually make a decision on whether it was true positive or false positive kind of thing, and say and feed that information up to the system so that it will actually help further investigations or further detections, right? So in this case, the other thing you can do is the mitigation actions, and you saw me talk about those in the policy, but if you actually needed to do anything available for those, you would do them here in this view as well. You can actually walk through those actions. The other thing you can do is to, if I go on here, you can actually go and set up add to blacklists or add to exclusions. If you actually need to create a exclusion for either the hash or the path of what was found, if it didn't actually happen to be a threat, you could create that here in an easy to use interface as well, right? And that would lead you to the settings on the policies pages, where, going back to that, you can actually list the ones that you've created in your environment here for the hash, path, signer identity type, for those kind of exclusions, right? So then further into the integration here, we have also added the ability to see the details. I mentioned the active issues, as well as the settings into how you can actually manage the roles and permissions for the integrations, right? So I mentioned that this is the first of many. You can actually see here for our super user role, and then every other role, you can actually configure who can actually use the integration management from a view and management perspective. And then for each individual integration, you can actually manage different parts of that application as well, to make sure that you only allow certain roles in your environment to have access to the feature. Okay, and that's about it for the demo right there. So any questions? I look forward to working with you on this over time. We're going to keep obviously with our model as we have it. It is a SaaS product, so we're going to continue to roll out new features and new improvements to this every week, on a regular basis. And we look forward to hearing your feedback and your usage.
All right, thank you so much, Nick. I am ready to start hearing your questions. We've already got a few that have come through. First is, does this replace RAV, which is Bitdefender and or Webroot? And I've seen a few asking, does this replace AV?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ashley, and it does, folks. As I mentioned, this is new tech. So this is not an overlay to your antivirus. There's no need to have both. It is 100% a replacement of your antivirus. It will do everything your AV did and more. So when you think about the costing differentials, an EDR does cost more money, okay, and it all depends on your volume levels and so forth. But think about the reduction in cost from your antivirus to the price you're paying for an EDR. That is your differential amount that you're paying. So you will have a slight uplift in your costs, but again, it's the ability for you to add a revenue stream or to increase some costing to your customers, thereby increasing your MRR and your profitability. It is not something that you need to overlay on top of an antivirus.
And I would just say to go further to say they can be installed at the same time, but if a detection happens and you have two engines trying to attack the same problem at the same time, you could get unpredictable results. So I would be careful with that. And as you're testing this out, as you I would say do that in a controlled environment as you start out.
Fair enough. And so somebody's got a really great question. If you're a Sentinel One customer, how do you migrate from your S1 subscription account to a SolarWinds based S1 subscription?
You want to take that, David?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Folks, we do have some ability to look at that. It depends on the cluster that you're in with Sentinel One. The best option there is contact your account manager, let them know. We'll work with you and our support team. We do have some abilities to work with Sentinel One to migrate those over to our clusters.
Rock and roll. Here's a really good question, Nick, that I think you could really help with. The difference between remediate and rollback.
So rollback is specifically for files that have changed on the system, right? So you think of the encryption, if ransomware happened and started encrypted files. So and the rollback feature, like I said, uses the volume shadow copy service to make snapshots as files are being changed in that kind of mode. And Sentinel One, the Sentinel One agent actually ends up controlling that and making sure that we can get back to recover those files. So remediate could be things that other changes on the system that are not necessarily file based. If it makes changes to registry keys or other settings like that aren't necessarily reflected in a file change that would be caught in by the volume shadow copy changes, then that's what would be covered by the remediation.
Awesome. I have a question around site level policies for integrated EDR. Nick, can you speak to that?
So site level policies is the view. You can actually set up the policies however you want, so that that's the grouping mechanism. The policies. So in site, it's a little bit an overloaded term between RMM and Sentinel One. But in Sentinel One, or if you're creating policies at your site level, that's going to be your easiest way to differentiate devices in a specific network segment or in a site for the RMM view. And policy management or just creating policies at that level is going to be your finest grain ability to control that.
Okay, and Do you recommend installing EDRI on servers as well as workstations?
It's fine, right? There's no problem with that. There is no difference in licensing, right? So it's the exact same agent that installs on both. And it does operate at the operating system level. So so Hyper-V level, it would only protect the host level, right? So you need to install it at each individual server if they were virtualized, but it will install in virtualized environments easily, very easily and fine. There is one caveat for file servers. If you actually install the Sentinel One agent on a file server, you saw in the policy view that I did there, when you install the Sentinel One agent the first time, it actually kicks off a file system scan of all the file systems attached to that device that are local, all local file systems. So if you actually install it on a file server, it's going to scan all of those partitions or file systems that are connected to that device. So just be mindful of that. There is a way to turn that off in the policy. So if you, for specifically those devices, I would say, again, do that in a testing in a controlled kind of environment to make sure that it works across the way your networks and environments are created, so that you don't run into any unforeseen problems in production. Now, everybody knows that production, sometimes you can only do stuff testing in production. But I would do as much testing in a non-prod environment on file servers as possible.
And this is an interesting question. What if the malware disconnects the device from the internet before EDR can remediate?
So the agent always has its latest policies after it registers. The first time it will have the latest version of policies, right? So in that case, if we had EDR agent installed and something got in and was able to execute because it's the latest, nastiness out there. And that's, if that happened and it was able to shut off the network, the agent's policies are still, or the agent is still configured with the policies it has. So it will still be able to protect the device from seeing malicious activity beyond that disconnection. So if it disconnects a device from, I'm trying to just think about, you'd still be able to protect the device with the volume shadow copy protection, the rollback, if it got ransomware kind of thing. I'm sort of thinking through what implications it could have if you could also do, if that would happen. But the agent would still be running on there and offer all the protections that were there. It's a matter of the cloud connectivity is for making sure it can be managed and all that kind of thing. But if it gets a network cut off, then it would be, it would obviously need to be hands-on on the device to actually to get it back up and running. But the agent would still be in its protection mode and still be managing that, especially with the rollback functionality for watching anything that happens to the actual files.
Fair enough. I see we're getting a lot of questions around the cost of integrated EDR, and I will say there's no cost difference between standalone and integrated. And if you want to speak to a sales rep about the current pricing or get a quote, be sure to put that in the question section, and someone will reach out to you after this webinar. And as far as other questions about the snapshot/rollbacks, how much space do they take up? Does it save all the data on the device/computer?
So the volume shadow copy stuff is configurable, and it needs to be enabled at your. You need to enable that on the devices where you want it to be executed. So there's typically, it's about 10% is what the recommendation is for some of that for the straight ahead configure or the base configuration of that. It's obviously configurable based upon how your environments look. We can get you some more detailed information on that, but there's no one set value of that's going to obviously work for everybody. but it is a environment specific kind of setting.
Yeah, I think to add to that, and it's a good question. We've got tens of thousands of these licenses out in the marketplace, and I've never actually had that come up as an issue anywhere, Nick. And we've got people with rollouts of over 10, 15,000 licenses of these. So I think it's a minor concern that you should have, and through your testing, I think you'll realize that it's not creating that additional load in your environment.
Excellent. And I have another question here. Can you ad hoc roll back a device manually after a threat is detected, or does it need to be configured as part of the policy?
Yes, you can. So the threat is what actually would indicate how you do the rollback. So yeah, if you have a policy that's not set up to roll back automatically, then you can go back in and as you're managing the threat, then you go to the mitigation actions, and rollback would be there available for you if there were files that were changed as part of that threat out of the process. So you saw in the process tree, it'll go all the way down and be able to give you that ability to do ad hoc from that interface. Yes.
Excellent. And somebody is asking, do we still get direct access to the Sentinel One portal? Do you want to speak to that, Nick?
No. Yes, I will speak to it. No, the integration here is the architecture is a managed integration, so that the account that is created in the console is managed by the integration, and you do not have direct access to that account on the Sentinel One console.
Just having a look at the rest of the questions now.
Yeah, Ashley, there's actually one there that I'd like to, and this comes up a lot, is the rollback feature with regards to ransomware if it corrupts or removes the VSS snapshots. So everybody's aware, and Nick, you may have a little bit more to add after. Sentinel One puts a protection layer around the snapshots. That's part of the install of the Sentinel One solution and the EDR. What they're doing, I can't technically explain that, but there is a protection layer around those so that those can't be affected.
Oops.
Yeah, there's actually some that's an ongoing thing, right? So Sentinel One does protect it, and like I said, take it over from that perspective. So other things that interact with the VSS need to play nice with it, right? But they are continuing to harden that, and I know that some of the malware that's out there is starting to attack that, because it invalidates their model if the files can be to be recovered. But that's just a continuing thing. It's a continuing back and forth for Sentinel One to continue doing that.
Someone said, how do we get help with remediation with Sentinel One? I once had a rollback fail and needed tech support with their SOC.
So we do have a direct support contract with Sentinel One. So if you have issues, you open up tickets with our support team, and we have a great support staff that can help you on the first line on that. If there's something that happens that they can't help you resolve, then we can contact Sentinel One and bring that in and help with that.
Yeah, and folks, we have a direct line to S1's L3 and engineering team. If you're ever having an issue with, say, a rollback, or there's some type of a breach that's occurred, please note that's an emergency ticket with us, okay? And we will absolutely jump on that for you right away.
And I also saw a great question about, do you have a set of best practices or recommended policy settings or onboarding webinars to review, and a bunch of questions around cybersecurity webinars? And the answer is yes, we do. We have a lot of cybersecurity boot camps. We have sessions with our head nerds. If you go to success.solarwindsmsp.com/head nerds, you'll see all of the info pertaining to those head nerd boot camps. There's also success.solarwindsmsp.com/events where you can look up the different webinar events that we have. I will be sending that information out to you after this webinar, so don't worry about frantically writing down that address. But I did want to address that while we had a second.
And so I'm just reviewing the list here too and say, how does it work with disk encryption? So right now, disk encryption management is a feature that is integrated directly with the MAV offering, and is very deep, right? Obviously the key management and everything like that. It doesn't, they are mutually exclusive, right? So if disk encryption management is a high priority for you, given your threat model, you know, how you're actually managing these, stick with it. That is a requirement to have MAV for DEM. And right now, the EDR integration does not have active management of encryption keys and the like. It will tell you, so the interface will tell you if BitLocker is turned on the devices, and it can tell you from that perspective if there is encryption on the device. But other than that, we don't actually have active management for DEM related functionality.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Nick, folks, if you feel that there is an absolute need to go to EDR and the disk encryption side is, and we do hear this, it's a conversation that we have on a regular basis. We do have some automation policies to give you some management level of disk encryption through BitLocker. So talk to your account manager or sales engineering, and they'll be able to show you some of what we've got available through our automation manager.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. There's also a question on here for iPhones or mobile devices. Right now, we don't have any support for mobile devices currently. Just looking through here. Is it necessary to have Backup Manager integrated to perform a rollback? I assume that means SolarWinds Backup Manager. It is not the case that you have to have that configured, although we'd love for you to. It is a fantastic product. But the rollback is, like I said, directly from the Sentinel One agent's management of. You do have to configure your volume shadow copy settings in your environment to be able to support that, though. So I would also say the remediation and rollback on Mac OS. Right now, rollback is supported for Windows only because it does use that OS level interface. There is some remediation there for Mac OS, and obviously with the Big Sur changes that are coming, we are actually, and maybe David talk about it too. You know, we're actually excited about a lot of the forward steps we're going to be making with our Mac support and management support over the next coming period. It's going to be exciting. I know Brian Betts and the team are really working hard on that. So I would expect a lot more to come from that.
Yeah, one of the other questions, Nick, that's in here is if they roll over to the integrated, is it the same if you're on standalone? What happens with your costing and structure of licensing? No change, folks. Okay, we don't charge additional for integrations, so you can absolutely just roll that over, and whatever model you're on today and costing, dependent on your volume, will be maintained moving forward.
And let me say some other things about the if you have standalone EDR right now, and you turn on your trial, I would suggest you create new policies, you know, that match mirror the policies that you already have. The devices, when you turn, there is no ability to migrate policies as they currently exist from your standalone account to your integrated account. But you'll need to create them, and then when you enable the feature, right? So you enable it at the device or at the settings and the policy level. When you apply it to the policy to the enablement, if that device has a Sentinel One agent that is managed by the account, the EDR standalone account that you are using from us, from Sentinel, from SolarWinds, then those devices will not need to, the agents will not need to be reinstalled. They will simply move from the standalone account to the integrated account, and then show and appear on the dashboard as I showed it there, right? So it's a migration / takeover operation. So if that happens, the device will be happily managed. Like I said, no new agent install or that kind of operation would be needed to. They'll just appear in the new dashboard and without any other operation. There is no automation for going back. Just to be clear, from integrated to standalone. In that case, you would need to uninstall the agent, reboot, and then reinstall the agent from the standalone account and register it to the standalone account as well. Just to be clear about that.
Okay, and I think we have some other questions coming in. We'll be sure to answer those in a follow-up after this webinar. And I also wanted to give you all a heads up that we do have some really great peer-to-peer webinars that are on the calendar for the rest of this month and every month. October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we've got a lot of really great webinars where we talk to lots of you about your cybersecurity posture and specifically EDR with a couple of customers. So be sure to look at our events page and sign up for some of those. We also have Cafe Con Louise that is weekly, where our marketing director, Louise, talks to customers just like you about the tools that you use, how you run your business, and EDR will certainly come up in those as well. I want to give a big thank you to our speakers, David Weeks and Nick Hansen, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us today, and be on the lookout for the follow-up to this. Thanks all.